stop watching TV and go read, 10 or 20 books that maybe they're in the same genre or same kind of story as what you want to write, but not necessarily. Get a variety of narrative voices under your belt.
Welcome to the Author Like a Boss podcast, the podcast for indie authors who want to improve their writing, up-level their marketing, make money with their books, and have fun doing it. Now, on to the show with your host, Ella Barnard.
Hey bosses, I've spent some time this last couple weeks trying to refine why I am so passionate about helping you, working with you, and what it is, like what the purpose of the podcast is, like purpose with a capital P. And I finally came up with it. It is to help women make money with their creativity, become their best selves, and ultimately transform the world. Now that's my purpose, but what it means when it comes to Author Like a Boss is that I want to help women author like a boss. That means helping women make six figures with their writing, and in the process of doing that, become their confident, badass selves. With this in mind, there's been some crazy, awesome stuff happening behind the scenes, and I'm really excited to share it with you. The best way to be notified of when all the awesomeness is going to be available is to sign up for the newsletter. To do that and to get a free copy of my ebook, Start Marketing Your Book, go to authorlikeaboss.com/free book. Hello, everybody. Hello, bosses. We are here today with Alida Winternheimer. Alida is an award-winning author, an experienced teacher, editor, and writing coach. Every day, Alida helps writers write better through her craft books, the Storyworks Fiction Online School, free writing tips, and the Storyworks Roundtable podcast. When she's not writing or teaching, you can spot her around Minneapolis on her bike, Minneapolis on her bike, in her kayak, or being walked by her golden retriever. Thank you so much for being here, Alida. How are you doing?
I am doing great. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. You have a lot of stuff that I'm curious about. So can you let's start with, I know, you're like, oh, good. This podcast, this interview will have content.
And it should be easy because you'll just prompt me for whatever you want to know, right?
Yes.
Yay.
But let's start how I always start with, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your author journey?
Okay, well, my author journey, I really think began right out of the womb, which I know sounds totally corny. That's a pretty cheeseball thing to say, but I have been writing for as long as I can remember, and it's always storytelling is a passion of mine. I if I can share a little anecdote.
Yes.
A few years back, a friend of mine was guiding me through kind of a meditation, relaxation, whatever thing. And he asked me what was my favorite thing to do as a child, to get to that really safe, relaxed place. And I was like, oh, that's easy. I had about 100 stuffed animals in my bedroom, and I could spend hours on end alone playing with these stuffed animals. And I would have these stories that could last for days. I would just stop them, at dinner time or whatever, go pick them up the next day. And as I was explaining this to my friend, I realized, oh, I was writing. Like, it wasn't being put down on paper, but I had characters and plots, and, I was just carrying them through scenes. Mm-hmm. So that's my writing origin story.
And that's where you started. So,
yeah. And
then now that was a little while ago. I'm imagining you with like Care Bears. I'm like, Care Bears, they're the best.
No. I think I was a little too old for Care Bears when they came out, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm imagining myself with Care Bears. Care Bears.
Okay. Right.
So then now you aged a little bit, and where are you now?
Well, now
I still have stuffed animals, but now
But no, right. Well, I like to sit on my floor with my teddy bears. And yeah, no, actually now I am a professional author, a full-time writer and writing coach. And in the interim, I spent many, many years writing all throughout my academic life. I have a lot of different interests. So I kept trying to leave writing and do other things with my life. In high school, it was writing and biology, but I actually entered college as a biology major. And then I dropped that and went to theater and anthropology. So with theater, I was back to writing. I was a playwright director. And then in graduate school, I first got a Master of Liberal Studies, which is interdisciplinary and self-designed. So I was going to look at women's spirituality, and my first big project was about this medieval French mystic. But by the end of my, 3 years in the program, I'd come back around to writing, and I was writing a novella that fictionalized Marguerite Porret's life. So I finally at that point realized there's no way I cannot write and do it as such a major part of my life that it's my career. So then I entered an MFA program and got my Master of Fine Arts in fiction. So,
wow.
And yeah, I was planning to get a PhD in anthropology there. I even, was accepted to a program and offered a grant, but then that didn't work out for life reasons. So it's like every time I tried to do something other than writing, it didn't work.
The universe was telling you something.
Yeah. It was like, would you just open your eyes and, do this thing? So, yeah,
like,
I
we
finally
don't want
got
you studying
message.
Other people's cultures. We want you making up your own.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And I do think my training in anthropology was a great study for being a writer, because it is the exploration of culture and the way people interact with each other and how you make things work as a society, as a community. So I think psychology and anthropology are both great fields to lead one into writing.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine that you find a lot of creative people, especially writers, who know people on a pretty advanced level, even without a psychology degree, because they spend so much time in other people's heads, the other people's heads that they make up.
Yes.
You know, like in their characters'
totally.
heads. You know what I mean? Like you spend so much time in there, you have to have some kind of, anyways, I've thought about that. And that's partially why I want creative people to make enough money to run the world.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yes. I'm like,
I think it would be a much better place.
Yes. I'm like, if all these creative people were running the world, especially writers, I like, because they have empathy, because they could put themselves in somebody else's head, because they do it all the time. They can see other perspectives because they have to if they're writing fiction.
Right. And we're interested in how other people live, not just our own personal subset of society, so we're always crossing those boundaries as writers, imagining ourselves into other lives.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my intention for my life. Transform the world so creative people are in charge. Okay.
It's a great mission.
It is. I know. Like, I love this mission. I made it myself. That's why. I have some questions. So now you've been writing, you've done all this educating, and so now you're helping other people with their writing? How do you do that?
Well, through my professional role as Word Essential as a developmental editor and writing coach. So basically, writers come to me with their projects, and I can help them at any stage of the game. Often they've already got a full manuscript or a partial manuscript. They've been at it long enough to realize they might need some coaching to take it to the next step. And so all of my experience and training, I put into helping people by working through their manuscripts with them or coaching them through their projects. I don't want to waste time outlining my editing packages, but it's really case by case. So it can look like a lot of different things.
What kind of, not talking about developmental editing specifically, because I'm actually curious about the coaching. What kind of challenges do people come to you with wanting your coaching?
Yeah, so they tend to be craft-based challenges. So I'm not the kind of coach who does hand-holding, like, did you get your butt in your chair 5 times this week and pound out, 5,000 words each time? That's not... That's not the kind of coaching I do. I do the kind of coaching where it's more personal than what a tutor does, because it's working with the individual on their project. So that person's baby is what I'm working with, and I listen to that writer's goals and that writer's vision for the project. So I might tell you, I think this needs to be different, and here's why, either from a craft perspective or from a reader's perspective. This isn't working quite the way you want it to because of this, but I never say it must be this way because I say so. So it's really a partnership, and my goal is to help the writer evolve into a better writer.
So do they come to you? Is it usually a finished manuscript?
No, it's always a work in progress, and it can be, a partial manuscript. It can be incredibly rough. It can be, the 4th draft, and they just don't know how to get over the hurdles they're facing. So with every prospective client, I do a sample consult, which I look at 10 pages, make comments on the manuscript, and then we Skype for an hour. So we know, I get a sense of where that project is at and what that writer is looking for, and they get a sense of who I am and how I work and what kind of feedback I'm going to give them.
So I'm kind of asking, I want to know, like, so that people can relate, not like to sell, not salesy, like, you guys find out Alida, go to her. Not that you shouldn't if you want to, but I want to know, like, what are some challenges? Like, can you give us an example of something that somebody might have? You don't have to be specific to the person, but you can say, I had somebody who came and had this kind of challenge, and this is how I walked them through accomplishing that.
Right. So the challenges kind of run the gamut, but one individual is going to have a specific set of challenges that they make continuously throughout their manuscript, and point of view is a major issue. That is a tough craft issue to wrap your head around and to control. So I often see manuscripts with too many points of view, so then they end up making mistakes like giving the wrong point of view character the perspective in a scene. The POV character should be the one with the most to gain or lose in that part of the story's movement, or they jump around too much between the point of view characters, and so then you don't get to really go into that perspective as a reader and feel your way through that movement and really get involved with that character. The emotional engagement stays too shallow when you've got too many POV characters and you're kind of dipping in and out of them. It can really throw off pacing as a result of that issue as well.
Why do you think people do so many different POVs?
I think it's because of television. I think we've gotten used to consuming stories visually where the camera functions as the narrator, and instead of entering a character's head and showing us a story through that lens, we're always kind of above and behind the character, and everything they want us to know, they show us by jumping around. So you're leaving the protagonist frequently to visit supporting characters, to visit antagonists, to just see what's happening in that world kind of all over the place. And that works really well in film. It doesn't work really well in long form narrative fiction because you lose the depth, you lose the insight of that point of view character. And writers who do that tend to make another big mistake, which is where they kill their own reveals. They set up some little piece of intrigue, but then they go visit the antagonist and show him plotting. And now when the protagonist encounters that plot point, there's not going to be any surprise or drama for the reader because we were just with the antagonist going, ha ha ha, next I will do this. And,
yeah.
Like,
so
okay.
We already know we're not there with the reader. We're not there with the protagonist being like, what? Because we already know.
Right.
I'm having some aha moments here, just so you know.
Oh, good. I love that.
I can hardly find any TV shows that I like to watch anymore. And I'm like, why? Because I like stories. Mm-hmm. And yes, there's other aspects to it. Like I like dark books to read, but I don't like to watch dark TV. It doesn't make me feel better. It makes me feel worse. And I don't, anyway, so there's all the other things, but part of it, I think, is that really getting into the character. Like I can't, I love character-based stories. Those are my favorite. And for a lot of readers, that's their favorite. Yeah. It's not, especially women, I think, although that's general and totally personal and has no basis in any data whatsoever.
Well, we do know statistically women are a greater percentage of the reading population than men. So
it's based off of when I read books written by men, they're not as character-based and more action-based. Versus typically, and I haven't read that many books by men, you guys, so don't just keep this in mind. But I'm just saying generally, I really like character-based, and that's maybe why I struggle so much finding TV shows I like to watch, because I'm I don't care about these people.
Power of narrative, and you lose the power of point of view, that point of view character. Yeah. You only get the part of narrative that lens can kind of imitate, by showing us the scene and showing us what's going on to and around that character, but you lose that intimacy.
Yeah. Ooh, how fascinating and how interesting for people who are wanting to write, because I think you're right. I hadn't thought about it before, but I'm like, so how, now that we've identified this challenge that people have, how do you recommend, or what are some of your tips for overcoming it?
Well, okay. So if you're a person who wants to write, who maybe has that great idea and that story playing out in your mind, but you haven't committed it to paper yet, stop watching TV and go read, 10 or 20 books that maybe they're in the same genre or same kind of story as what you want to write, but not necessarily. Get a variety of narrative voices under your belt. Study pacing, not just beach reads, not just thrillers, but look at the power of narrative and what you as the author need to actually convey to the reader through your words, because it's not all everything on that page. In fact, not that much of it comes out of the character's mouth or out of the character's thoughts. So a lot of new writers neglect their narrator because they don't really understand how important it is. And they only think of POV as the POV character, probably because that's how everybody talks about it. But you need to think of point of view as everything in your novel besides action, thoughts, and dialogue.
Oh my gosh.
That's what your narrator does for you.
You have to tell me more about this neglecting the narrator, because I don't even know exactly what you mean, and I want to.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, so if I may, in my book, Guide to Writing Point of View, the Storyworks Guide to Writing Point of View, I do discuss this in full, but it's just, so I wrote, I started this series because of my work as a writing coach, and I really wrote these books for my clients, trying to address the common errors I see and to bring craft into a really practical, workable place, out of the ivory tower of the MFA programs and into something super useful. And this neglection of the narrator is such a common problem. And I call it the POV stranglehold. So I invented a term for it because writers get so concerned with showing the reader what the point of view character is seeing, doing, thinking, feeling, and feeling emotionally. They often neglect other senses like smelling, hearing, tasting, touching, that they lose the sense of narrative, and their manuscripts start to read more like a play script than like a novel because their narrative voice gets strangled. It's choked off to only telling us he set the coffee cup on the table, he answered the door. And then the sentences lose their flow, they lose their energy, they lose their power to, enter a reader's mind and like blossom there, because they become this very stilted subject verbs,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's a big part of neglecting the narrator.
Okay. So for an example, personal example,
Mm-hmm.
and tell me if this is what you're talking about.
Okay.
I wrote a book. I wrote a short story. It's been published, you guys. It's in the Dreams of Darkness anthology. And so one of the scenes, I have the main character fly off. She's escaping a bad situation and she flies off on, spoiler alert, you guys. She flies off out of, this ball on a giant raven. Okay. So she's like, I'm out of here, saving myself. And then I ended the scene where she's like escaping and she's not sitting, that's the end of the scene. And the next scene, she's in her house. And so that's what I did. And then I read another person in the same anthology, Cassidy Taylor. Her story, she has not a similar scene, but it is a scene where the main character gets taken and flying through, flying on with a dark hunt, very dark hunt. And she did not cut off. She didn't end the scene right when the main character got on the raven or started flying. She kept it going because readers want to experience the flying with the dark hunt. Not just the tiny aspects of that are directly associated with moving the character forward, which is what I did, moving the story forward. And I realized when I read hers that I had missed that opportunity of allowing the reader to enjoy a midnight ride on a massive raven because it wasn't part of the main character, like it wasn't part of moving the story forward. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, so not quite. That's not really a narrative stranglehold. So a narrative stranglehold with choking off your narrator. No, it's a great example to talk about, though. I love having concrete examples. I'm not saying, this and that and the other. So if you had said she climbed onto the raven's back and they flew into the sky, the sky was dark, they landed with a jolt, whatever. Okay, that would be losing the power, not using the power of narrative in order to bring that experience to life for your reader. Okay. So that might be an example of choking off your narrator because you're just thinking too much about, getting from A to B and not using your descriptive power. Right. Okay. So writers who are choking off their narrator tend to be afraid of description because they think if they, pull back from that point of view character and describe the scene, they're going to be committing a POV slip, which they aren't. There's also a lot of confusion about terminology because there's kind of conversational vernacular in the way things are used, like POV only referring to POV character and show don't tell and POV slip, right? And so one of the things writers need to know is that a POV slip is when you slip out of your one point of view character's head and into another unintentionally or in an awkward way that's jarring to the reader. It doesn't mean you've left your POV character's head in order to use your narrative. So what you did, I would say, is you used a jump cut, to borrow the term from film, not really a literary term, but a scene break functions just like a jump cut. So you ended that scene where she's on the Raven, and whether it was an abrupt ending or not, it perhaps cut the scene shorter than it might have because you didn't flesh out that experience of flying on the Raven. And then you opened up the next scene in a new location, which is perfectly fine. My question for you would be, did that scene with the Raven reach its emotional peak, or did you end it prematurely? So using the scene break as a jump cut, nothing wrong with that. It just sounds like from how you compared your scene to the other writer's scene that you feel like you missed an opportunity to expand the experience and bring the reader into that, the power of flight vicariously through what your protagonist was living.
That's exactly what I was thinking. You are a good writing coach.
Oh, thanks.
So I was like, when I read it, it's a dark fantasy story. And, part of fantasy is being able to experience stuff like that. And I cut it short.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a missed opportunity.
Yeah,
but,
missed opportunity.
You'll never make that mistake again.
No, you're right. You're right.
Right.
Yeah. I may not have known, though, if I hadn't read this other lady's story. If I hadn't read Cassidy's story, I may not have ever noticed. So that's interesting.
Right. Right. And now all of your listeners have to go get that anthology and read the two stories so they can go, oh, that's what that means. There it is.
There it is. I know. Dreams of darkness, you guys. So, okay. Marketing, you guys. Woo. See how I just slid it in?
Yeah.
So naturally. Okay. So I'm curious. So you are also a writer, not just a writing coach.
Right.
So, but I think we've gotten some good stuff. I really like what you're saying, but
thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about your writing routine? What's your personal writing routine?
So currently my writing routine is to roll out of bed, make some coffee or tea, and get a square of dark chocolate. It's very important to have the ritual established. And then I sit on my couch and I write longhand. And I write until I stop. So I'm not going for word count. I'm not going for time. I usually get through a scene, or I get through some kind of movement, and I stop when I hit that point where I know I need to think and digest and, do some kind of mental processing more. And it's not that I would love to write for 10 hours a day and just keep it rolling, but I have other responsibilities. So I find when I hit that kind of natural breaking point, that's usually a good time of the morning to switch gears and, do my other work.
It sounds kind of like Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way, except for fiction. Like my morning pages, but my morning pages are just me writing my story. So you write longhand. How does that make a difference for you?
Well, it frees up the creativity, I find. So I wrote everything longhand all my life until I entered that first graduate degree program, because there I found I had too much I needed to write in a week to write it longhand and then type it, and meet my deadline. So I trained myself to compose on the keyboard. So I can compose on the keyboard, but I feel, there's definitely a kinesthetic connection between the mind and the hand. And there are actually some studies that have found that people are more creative. The creative parts of their brain are lighting up better and their ideas are flowing better and they're more creatively productive when they're writing longhand versus typing or, tapping things into your phone. So even if I'm composing on a keyboard for some reason, anytime I get stuck and have a problem to solve, I pick up my pencil. I go back to longhand. And for this current book, I started longhand. It's been working. I have no desire to go to the computer right now. Mm-hmm. It just feels really good to be composing longhand. And I like seeing paper. I like being able to, because I do a lot of insertion points. So I'll write a paragraph and then I'll put an asterisk and I'll go to a different sheet of paper and I'll write the thing that needs to go in there and do all this kind of stuff. And I can physically see it and spread it out and move it around on paper. But on my laptop with, I think I have a 13-inch monitor, it's scrolling. You only get to see a little bit at a time. Mm-hmm. So I think that's another kind of physical piece that works with the creative side of our brains.
Yeah. I was like, I for a very long time was like, I'm not a writer. But then I realized that I've been journaling since I was in the 4th grade. So 8.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I've been journaling for a very long time. And so I know what you mean, or I have my own experience with writing longhand, accessing. For me, I feel like it accesses, it's kind of a form of meditation where it accesses the better parts of myself.
Yes.
Especially when I'm like in a bad space and I need to let something out.
Yeah.
If I just talk it out, I don't always get to the better spot. But if I write it out, I do. It's like, oh, this is how, it's almost like a form of prayer or meditation or accessing my higher self. I'm getting very woo-woo, you guys, but it does make a difference for me. I hadn't considered writing whole books longhand, but I kind of like the idea.
Yeah, I am a huge fan of it, and I make the case for writing in longhand in my books and in all of my classes and, with my coaching clients as well. I'm not telling anyone to write an entire novel longhand, but do your pre-writing, do your journaling, do your idea generation. And anytime you get stuck, go back to that pen in hand. And, can I guarantee you'll get unstuck? Well, for me, I have always gotten unstuck as soon as I started writing longhand, because I think it lets the thoughts flow. And when I'm at the keyboard, it's more like blinking cursor. It's kind of like I get stuck there. So yeah, compose on a keyboard, fine, but don't neglect longhand as a tool.
I like the amount of time because it takes longer to write longhand. And so while I'm finishing one thought, another thought is percolating.
Right.
Whereas I don't, like when I type much faster. Yeah. I don't have that, which means I don't give my percolating thought time to percolate.
Right. And I think my vocabulary is better when I write longhand for that very reason, because even though it might just be half a second for how quickly our brains process things and move, that's a lot of time. That's a luxurious amount of time to be kind of letting words pop up and alternate words and, those new ideas and such. And it makes a difference. I'm not just sort of grabbing the first word and getting it down, trying to match my finger speed. It's just a much more fluid, I don't know, I find it a very pleasant way to write, meditative, like you were saying.
And, okay, so here's my question and thoughts. So how do you find, for people who only have a little bit of time, maybe, maybe they don't have as much time or it's not as flexible.
Right.
How would they utilize this strategy or this practice of longhand?
Well, the same way you utilize any other tool, if get a pocket-sized or bag-sized notebook to keep with you. So if you've got those few minutes, you can jot stuff down or, talk into your phone, make yourself a voice note when you're out. And then as soon as you get home, transfer that into your journal or into the scene you're writing longhand. And when I would, try to have a designated space for this practice and make it, a sacred space in terms of being special, inviolable. When my child was very young, I happened to have a table on a 3-season porch that was sort of extra space, so I claimed it as my writing table because we didn't have to eat there all the time. Mm-hmm. And so I never packed away my writing. So I had notebooks, I had research books, I had my 3-ring binders full of my, manuscript, my loose leaf paper, I had my pencils, I had, my coffee cup. So if I put my baby down to nap, all I had to do was walk to my chair and start writing. And very quickly, my brain became trained with that association. So it didn't take me, I didn't have distracted time trying to settle in. And so by not needing to go, oh, do I have to clear the table? Do I have to get out my notebook? Do I have to sharpen a pencil? It was all just there. Mm-hmm. So even if it's just keeping a notebook and a pencil in sight, even if that's all the space you can claim, just do it and establish that association. If I go to this notebook, I'm in writing mode.
Mm-hmm. And don't lie, everybody. We all know you have a shelf full of notebooks like I do.
Right.
I have a notebook addiction. And now I'm wondering if this is why. It's because I was supposed to be writing longhand regularly for my stories because I have so many notebooks. Because I love notebooks. Every time I go to the store, then I have a little extra time. Like if I'm not in a rush, every time I go to the store, I will walk through the notebook aisle just to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think writers are all stationary nerds.
Yes.
We're like, paper.
Yeah. Yes. Different
writing
pens.
utensils.
We all know which are our favorite pens and pencils, the ones that are the best. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I really like that. And then last question about this longhand thing is your process for typing it out. Do you type it out, I'm going to assume, but do you find yourself making any edits or revisions while you're doing that?
Typically, yes, I do, but not major things because I don't want to stop typing up that manuscript and start redrafting. So it's more like word choice, or I might make a note to myself like the scene isn't working or fact check that, or, and just keep going. And I actually do that as I write longhand. This current manuscript is historical, and I need to get over to the Minnesota Historical Society's library and do some research. And when I do that, I'll figure out the exact name of the town I want to use. Right now, I don't know. So I just put town in all caps, and, and I'll put things in brackets, and with, question mark means fact check. And so I revise as I type, but in a minimal way. Okay. If it's something that needs an overhaul, I just make a note to myself so that when the entire thing is typed, which also, so right now I'm in the 290 some longhand pages. So I know what I wrote back on page 6, but it's not fresh in my mind. So typing it refreshes everything in the story and kind of brings me up to speed with a quicker process than the writing, than the first draft process for me.
Yeah. And do you outline?
Yeah. So I call it storyboarding. Okay. Because outlining sounds rigid and fastidious and scares a lot of people. Okay. And, having been trained in theater, doing my BA in theater, when you're directing a play, you have to visualize your set and your costumes, and you have to do the marking of where you want people to be in a scene and how things are going to best play out. So kind of taking that piece of my training and then also the film concept of storyboarding, I do a verbal, a written word type of storyboard for the entire arc of my book. And then that gives me the necessary guideposts and keeps me from getting off track. And it allows me to look at my plot arc and my character arc before I start writing the book. I also storyboard again before I do a major revision because things change. I do veer off from my storyboard. I want enough fluidity to be able to innovate as I write. So then I'll do a new storyboard of, what I want that next revision to be, to make a new set of guideposts.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So when you're writing this longhand, 290 pages.
So far.
It's not pantsing.
No.
Per se. You have an idea. So that way. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do a ton of journaling.
Okay. What's that about?
That's where my idea generation really comes through journaling. As soon as me too. And as soon as I get an idea that I know I want to turn into a book, I start writing stuff down. And all of my ideas evolve on the page in the journal. So by the time I'm doing a storyboard, I've already got a pretty good idea of who my character is. When I do my character development exercises, those go into that journal. And the journal becomes a home, a collecting place for everything that's doing around the story. Because answering questions about my character will give me ideas about my plot, and coming up with, some kind of supporting character will help me figure out something new about my character. You can't do any one aspect of your story in a vacuum, isolated from the other aspects of story. So the journal is very freeform, and then the storyboard is structured, and they work together to give me room to be messy and creative and innovative, but then also set up that roadmap for my drafting process.
Yeah, I really like that. And so you have each story has its own journal?
Yes.
Oh.
Yep. Yeah. As soon as I know this idea is going to become a book, I give it a journal. And that journal, sits out on my coffee table, travels with me. As soon as I get an idea, that's its home.
That's so smart. I love that so much. Because for the way that my mind works, specifically, everybody, this is for me. I love it because I read a lot, and writing is not my genius. It's something that I do for fun. I can't remember. It's not my thing of genius. It's my thing of fun.
Okay.
But I still, so as I'm reading, because that's my go-to relaxation type thing, I have ideas and things that I'm like, oh, I really like how they did this. Oh, I really like how they did this. And so now, but then I haven't been putting that anywhere. And then of course, just like anything, you're like, I'll remember for sure.
Yeah.
No.
And you never do.
No, and I don't. And so I'm thinking like, oh, I'm having all these ideas for like starting journals, because I have ideas for books, and I have been putting all of my ideas for things in just one notebook, but I love the idea of having each story has its own notebook.
Right.
And just building a whole world in a notebook and a whole story in a notebook before I even have it done. And then taking like, oh, I want to have this kind of scene in there. And then putting that in the notebook, and then later being like, oh yeah, how can I put that into my storyboard / outline?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've got one journal that is labeled creativity journal. And that's kind of a dumping ground for any new kind of starter ideas that are in their infancy that may or may not go anywhere, or for thoughts about craft or, quotes I really want to, do something with. Anything can go into the creativity journal. But once I've got that idea that won't let me go, that's been percolating, that, okay, this is a book, then it gets its own journal.
Oh my gosh. So cool. Okay. So a lot of our readers, or a lot of our listeners, sorry, I'm in a reading theme, because it's about a whole podcast about writing books.
Of course.
A lot of our listeners are just, working on some of their first maybe their first manuscript, or some, or or early on. So what would you say for those people who are pretty early in their process? What would be some of your best advice for them?
Oh gosh. So, all right, this might be multi-pronged here. We'll see.
Okay.
This is off the cuff. Can you tell? So first I would say ritualize the writing. It's never going to happen if you don't make it happen. So do what we were talking about before, like get the notebook, set up the space, whatever it takes. And I don't think you have to focus on time or word count. You just need to focus on doing it and enjoying it. Make it fun. Writing is a creative art. And if you enjoy going to that notebook or that keyboard, then great things are going to happen. And then the other thing, I just went there and lost track of my other prong. Oh, isn't that awful?
No, I had it happen on an interview recently where I was like, oh, I have these 3 things that I want to touch on. And then I went on a tangent on the first one and I was like, I can't remember the other 2, but sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So so we're going to stick with best advice is creating a ritual around the process
writing and make it fun. Yeah. And I know the other point I was going to make is to practice lots of things. So before my MFA program, I had spent years working on one particular novel, which was great, but unless inspiration struck to do something different, I was always working on that one novel, which meant I was always in one point of view, one narrative voice, one setting, that I had built as a world, one historical period, all of these things. And when I got into the MFA program and I had professors giving me assignments, I was reading all kinds of stuff I never would have read otherwise. I was writing all kinds of stories, and I was being told the parameters of that story, and I was given a tight deadline and a word count, and it upped my creative production like I never would have imagined, because I got out of the box of the novel I was working on. So even if you're sitting down to write long form fiction, a novel, or even a series, don't limit yourself to that box. Play. So maybe, for the first 20 minutes of your writing time every day, you do a writing prompt or you start a short story and just see what happens. Or maybe one writing day a week, so for 5 or 6 days, you work on that big project, but then once a week, go do something else. Go be creative in other ways, other worlds, other genres, other voices. And I think it'll really help explode not only your creativity, but also your understanding of craft. Because if you keep doing the same thing over and over and over, you aren't going to expand your knowledge base.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I'm thinking about this lady, Cassidy, that I was telling you about earlier. She's going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm in the episode. So Cassidy Taylor, she writes epic fiction, like epic fantasy. But right now she's also co-writing with somebody else. And so there's these deadlines that she's had to do to maintain, to be part of the co-writing process. And so 2 years ago, she was just finishing her first book, and I met her halfway through the first book. And 5 months later, she finished the first book. This was starting in June. It published in November.
Wow.
So first book, it's good. It's when rains fall. But this year, so that was June. Now we're in, by the time this comes out, it'll probably have been almost exactly 2 years. And this current year of 2019, I think she has on her plate to complete something like 12 books, including those co-written ones, right? But 12 stories. And some of them are anthologies. Some of them are these, co-written, and some of them are her own. And I think, as an observer, I would say having those deadlines and I think it's happened naturally, what you were saying, to do purposefully is
right.
that her creativity is going because she has all these things that she has to do. She's working with other people on their ideas, not just her own, right? And doing anthologies that are very specifically themed and are short stories, not full-length novels. So I think it's happened very naturally, but you can do that purposefully, like you were saying.
Right. Yeah. And there are plenty of writing prompts out there, and you can find writing prompts anywhere. Just look at headlines, look at sound bites, and have fun with it. You can be ridiculous, because if it's an exercise, you aren't intending to publish it, but then it might grow into something exceptional, and it could start at the silliest place. One of my 2 stories that was nominated for the Pushcart started in a class in the MFA program. The professor had us all bring in 3 headlines from newspapers, and then we had to pass our headlines forward around the classroom, so we didn't get to keep the ones we had selected. Right. And so then you end up collecting 3 headlines from 3 different people. And I was like, oh God, this is awful. My headlines, they sucked. So the one I picked was about a woman in a small zoo in Wisconsin had tried to feed a black bear a hot dog and lost 2 of her fingers as a result, right? So this became my writing prompt. That was the best of my 3 headlines. And I was like, oh God. But it turned into this really fun little story from the bear's point of view that I love. It's a favorite of mine, and it was published by a literary journal, and that editor nominated it for the Pushcart Prize that year. It didn't win a Pushcart, sadly, but it's still a favorite story of mine, and it had such humble origins,
Wow. Yeah, I'm thinking like, I majored in women's spirituality and anthropology, and like,
yeah.
Awesome, though. That's a great example, though, of how you can take something and play and practice and utilize your imagination and creativity. Challenge. It's like exercising,
Yes. Yeah.
Using a muscle in a different way than you normally do. And it's a little bit difficult, but then you're like, oh, but I feel stronger now.
Right. Absolutely. And okay, just in the interest of shameless plugs, that story, I did put it up on Amazon. It's called Wild Animals. It's actually, I think there are 2 stories in that collection.
Okay.
2 or 3. So anyway, if anyone wants to read a story in a bear's point of view, it's on Amazon.
And you have it under Alida Winternheimer? Yes. Okay.
Yep. And it's the Wild Animals.
ALIDA Winternheimer. Okay. Okay. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about, because you offer coaching and you have courses. So can you tell us where's the best place for people to find and get your help from you? Sure.
So wordessential.com is my editing and coaching website, and it has the blog tab, has all of my free writing tips, and the Storyworks Roundtable tab has all of the podcasts that we do. You can also get those where you get podcasts or on YouTube. There is a tab that goes to the Storyworks Fiction School. You can also link to all of my published fiction and my craft books from Word Essential. And of course, my coaching services are offered there, but wordessential.com, and then just go through the tabs, and all of my stuff can be linked to through that site.
Awesome. I love it. Just one easy place for people to find you. Wordessential.com. And then this will be in the show notes, you guys. So if you go to authorlikeaboss.com and look at this episode, we'll link to it there as well. Awesome. Thank you so much, Alida. This was great.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was fun. I always love talking about writing, and
me too. I can talk like that. That's why I have a podcast, and maybe you do too. Haha.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe a little self-indulgent.
Yes. Awesome. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Everybody who's listening, hugs and happy authoring here at Author Like a Boss.
If you love the Author Like a Boss podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes. Until next time.